I believe if you've called in, you can *6 will unmute yourself. So whoever that is that called on the 732 number, if you'd unmute yourself and let us know if you are Bob or if you're here for a comment.
This is Mike Sieska. It is not Bob.
Thank you, Mike. All right.
Mike, have you joined to make public comment?
I have not. I've just listened to the discussion, basically.
Oh, okay, great. That is also good.
All right. Are we streaming? Looks like it.
Yes, we're good to go.
We are. Thank you so much, Mallory. I appreciate you jumping in on that.
I'm quick switching over to my computer. I was having technical difficulties, and I'm going to switch just for clarity's sake. So sorry, having a little bit of technical trouble.
That is fine. We will see you on in just a minute. It is 4:06, so I'm going to call us to order. And I see Makeda, who's going to be rejoining with computer issues. But Makeda is here, Garish is here, Josie is here, Rick is here, Steve is here, and I'm here. We're missing Bob O'Brien, who hopefully will be able to join us later in the meeting. All right, so before we kick into our regular business, this is a time if there are any citizens here to speak on any items listed as not a public hearing. So we don't have any public hearings today. So if you would like to make a comment as citizens to be heard, now is your opportunity. You can put a note in chat or come off of mute and make your comments. Please introduce yourself with your full name first. Okay. I don't see anybody, so we'll go ahead and move on. Ex parte communications and disclosures. Does anybody have any disclosures to report today? Okay, so we will move on to approval of the meeting minutes from February 8th. And I did have a question on this on page, I think page 3. When we have the motion and vote on the HDHO rules and regulations, and then the motion and vote on the bylaws. On the rules and regulations, was Josie not present for that part of the conversation? I know, Josie, you dropped briefly, but we have only 5 votes recorded for that, and I just wanted to make sure that was accurate.
I think that was when I was having difficulties with my internet. Yeah, I mean, for the record, my vote was a yay vote, but I don't know if that was recorded.
Okay, yeah, I just couldn't remember when you had dropped.
I'm not sure either.
I can, if you'd like to approve the minutes with that update, I can update the minutes that Josie also voted in favor before we publish those.
Yeah, that would be great, because then the other one is for the bylaws, it says the motion passed 6-0, and I see O'Brien, York, Evers, Willis, and Campbell voting aye, but by then I believe that Josie was back. So let's just make sure that we have those titles accurate, and I think we can take an emotion with those adjustments to be made before, saving the record. Okay. Any other comments? Awesome. Thanks, Abby. Any other comments? Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion. Okay. Is there a motion to approve?
I move to approve the minutes.
Okay, Josie moves to approve, seconded by Garish. All in favor? Raise your hand.
Aye.
Okay, aye. Any opposed? All right, unanimous 6-0 with Bob O'Brien absent. And we will move on to our first discussion item, which is the land use code options for ATV governance. And I believe Commissioner Walker is here to join us. Hi. So I invited Kevin here today after speaking to him briefly just about this agenda item. And I asked him if he would just provide a little bit of context for the conversations that he has been having with the other commissioners. And this is largely just a discussion item to make sure that we understand where the county commission currently sits. And of course, Commissioner Hedin, we'd love to hear your thoughts as well. And that way, should the planning commission be asked to make a recommendation or take any action moving forward, we have context for where things sit. So I think, Kevin, I'll go ahead and turn the court over to you.
Okay, and I think my understanding is maybe after I talk, Christina might also talk about some of maybe more implementation or specifics.
Okay.
But so there's certain things I'm not going to talk about unless I misunderstood, and I should. So, Christina, if that's incorrect, why don't you tell me?
Yeah, why don't you talk about, Kevin, where the commission is with things and direction the commission's given, and then I'll bring up our proposal and you can chime in as you want to. I'm going to defer the overlay discussion to you as well.
Okay, that sounds great. That's what I had in mind. So as we know, there have been a lot of complaints about noise in town over the past few years. And that has largely to do with the rising popularity of UTVs, combined with the fact that the state legislature forces us to allow them to drive on our residential streets. I personally think, and I think a majority of the county commission thinks, that this is a very serious problem, and we should be using all of the tools in our toolbox to solve it. We have also gotten the message from the state legislature. We tried over the past few months to get them to just give us, if not local control, then maybe a curfew, just do something. And that didn't go anywhere. And similar efforts in previous years did not go anywhere. And one message we're getting consistently from the state legislature is, show us that you are unable to solve this locally. Personally, I think they raise a legitimate point. So I believe both the city and the county are thinking hard about two things. One is enacting a local noise ordinance, which would apply to all vehicles. But a second thing would be using the land use code or business license stuff, and Chrissy, you can give the details, to regulate the rental UTVs. So this would be worth doing if we think that rental UTVs is a significant fraction of the traffic. I think most people I've talked to think it is, especially on Mill Creek Drive on the way up to Sand Flats. No one has exact figures for what it is, though we are beginning to gather more precise data at the Sand Flats entrance booth. And so the question then is, how should we regulate UTV rentals? Some of the ideas that I've heard mentioned is cap the number of businesses, cap the fleet size, say that the vehicle rental UTVs have to be quiet, maybe not much quieter than a passenger car, or say that they have to be trailered to a trailhead. I think that's most of it. And so I'm going to defer to Christina saying that, how we might actually implement those things. But I do, we could just strike UTV rentals from the use table altogether. I mean, we do have a fair amount of power in planning and zoning about allowing or disallowing business types. And then, as Christina, I think, will explain, in Title V, which isn't really the purview of the Planning Commission, but the two are linked, Land Use Code and Title V, which is the business license stuff, we might have even more freedom to regulate things there. So a proposal that I've been discussing, and I can't remember whether I've discussed it with Trish before, but I have discussed it with a majority of county commissioners recently, and a majority thinks this is worth looking into further as something we might want to adopt after we hear public comment and discuss. One is, limiting the number of businesses. If we're saying that UTV noise is one of the biggest problems in our community, then why are we, allowing those businesses to proliferate when we're not legally obliged to do so? So that would be one thing, to cap the number, or some people talk about shrinking the number. And then the second thing, for the existing businesses that do stick around, what I would propose is that if they've got a UTV and it's pretty noisy, which is probably a majority of the existing fleet, they can rent it, but it has to be put on a trailer. This is something that we want all UTV users to do. This is what we've been asking the state legislature for. And the state legislature won't let us do it, but even without their cooperation, we can at least do it for the rental UTVs. But I think there's an important exception we can make, which is if you do manage to get a UTV that's, roughly as quiet as a passenger car, we can debate, what the actual goal is and how we would measure it. But if it's not much louder than a passenger car, then I think our issues in residential neighborhoods go away. And there's no reason for us to put any restrictions on that. And so I think rental UTVs that do pass, say a tailpipe test with an appropriate dB level could be rented, the way they are now, driven off the lot. So I think that's the basic idea. And before I turn it over to Christine, I do want to say that this is, the UTV noise issue is a vexing and difficult to solve problem. And I was campaigning for office last fall, and that was like the main thing I heard about. So I am very, if people are not enjoying peace and quiet in their own home, that's a very serious problem. We talk about, I've talked to multiple people who talk about moving away, or that, their property values are going down, or just life isn't as good anymore because they can't really enjoy their backyard. So I really do think we should be doing everything in our power to stop this. And so everything includes things that maybe go a little bit outside our comfort zone. And so it might be that for run-of-the-mill issues, you say, well, but this would cause hardship to thus and such a business. And we think, okay, we don't want to do that then. I think to solve this problem, we're going to have to spread the inconvenience around. And that means inconvenience for people enforcing the rules and the businesses. And so I don't think, so I basically, I think we should be trying very hard because this is a very serious problem. I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Okay, I am going to try to share my screen. Yes, I can do that. Oh, host, Mallory, I need you to enable me to screen share, it looks like. And I'll just say while we're waiting for that, the commission has given direction a couple times via discussions in public meetings to staff and electeds. And I would say, my takeaway is they want radical change. I'm not saying that's a word that any particular commissioner used, but that was certainly the gist of the comments every single time. And that noise is the #1 issue that constituents discuss / complain about with commissioners. So keeping that in mind, I am going to, is that big enough or should I make it bigger? And if I do,
That's pretty big.
okay, good, because I don't know how to make it bigger. So I'm going to present 2 options. One option is my recommendation and one option is what Kevin likes. And these are just for discussion today. And then the next step will be a public hearing before the Planning Commission at the next meeting. So the top of this is just a summary of where we are. The land use code does not differentiate between outfitter, guide service, and facilities in terms of type. So there is no, separate treatment of ATVs, and we're proposing to do that. And then also for motor vehicle sales, there is no ATV differentiation there either. And both of those two, actually the outfitter, guide service, and facility currently is a conditional use in a few different commercial zones. And then the vehicle sales, rental, and leasing is a use by right in fewer zones, essentially our commercial zones. There isn't much in terms of requirements on outfitter, guide services, and facilities. Currently, only a screening requirement, which I actually don't think is very feasible or sort of a thing for ATV businesses, but that's for you guys to opine on. And then again, this is just showing you there isn't any differentiation in these different categories. Okay, so option 1, which is my preference, is to make these ATV businesses, and we'll define that in code, a conditional use in commercial zones with specified conditions about noise, essentially, subject to a permit cap in Title 5 of our general ordinances. So Title 5 is our business licensing ordinance or business licensing regulations. And I'm going to bring that up, my very draft proposal of what that looks like, where the permit cap goes. But we do have very broad power as a county to regulate what businesses do business here. And we need to use that broad power. And to do that, we do that in Title 5, not the land use code. So the changes that I would propose to section 3.1 or use table is to split out these outfitter and guide service and then the rental and leasing to create new ATV categories. One thing I'm realizing in communicating with our clerk's office today is that at least in the county, and I don't think that's necessarily true in the city, in the county, the businesses are doing both. So I don't think we have a single business in the county that only rents ATVs. So I didn't know that until about 3:52 today. And so I am going to have probably a little bit of a nuanced proposal for the public hearing, but essentially splitting out this ATV business type wherever we land. And then specifying in the land use code, these commercial use designations, specifying some more information. So that's what we're doing in the table. My proposal, and this is up for feedback from you guys, is that ATV outfitters could be a conditional use in our general and resort special zones, but the ATV sales and rental would only be in those pure commercial zones of highway commercial and general business. I'll want to think more about that and possibly provide a slightly different recommendation if we're only creating sort of a combination class. But that's how I have it set up for now for you guys to discuss. The changes that we need to do in 3.2.3, these are the conditional use permit requirements. So we already have this K1. We would be specifying that the screening requirement applies to general outfitters, guide services, et cetera. And I think mostly what we have, and Abby, feel free to correct me, would be maybe rafting services, mountain biking services, where you have more personal property that's much easier to screen and more important to screen because it kind of looks like junk when it's all piled up together versus vehicles. I personally don't think the screening requirement is necessary for ATV businesses, but open to your feedback on that. And then number 2, and so this is split out for ATV outfitter, guide services and facilities. And then my new section is about sales and rentals. These are almost identical. And again, now that I realize that we don't really have separate ATV sales and rental businesses, I think we will end up combining this. But the essence is that it would, in this my proposed 2A, is that it allows permitting these ATV businesses as a conditional use only if the maximum number of permits for ATV businesses allowed in the county are not met as set forth in chapter 5.02 of our general ordinances. And then subsection B is here are regulations if there are permits up for grabs. All ATVs used in or by, and below it specifies rented, sold, or leased by an ATV business shall not exceed the maximum sound pressure level of blank dBA. We need to figure out what that is, as measured by the SAEJ 1287 stationary test. I can talk about that in a bit, from an exhaust outlet at a distance of 20 inches. Provided, however, that an ATV business may elect to trailer their ATVs to trailheads in lieu of meeting the sound pressure level requirement. This requirement applies regardless of whether an owner or agent of an ATV business is driving the ATV. Again, that's getting at, these tour guides. Some of these are self tours, so they have a guide in the group versus a guide in the vehicle. Some of them are guided in the vehicle. Subsection 2 here, each ATV business must submit a certificate of compliance issued by the Grand County Sheriff's Office annually upon renewal of their business license at their cost. And then optional, my recommendation is if the level is below 92 dBA, then it's my recommendation we allow a 3-year period to comply. requiring that 1/3 of the fleet shall be upgraded to comply each year for 3 years, beginning January 1, 2022. And that's because older ATVs cannot be modified for a reasonable cost to get under 92. Newer ones can, but we can get to 92 dBA on any machine that's on our streets today. This is what the ATV community is telling me. With about a $500 investment in a silencer, a silencing muffler. I'll get back into that in a second, because there's a lot of background there, because at the same time, we're going to be looking at this Title V update, and at the same time, we're looking at a noise update in the county. But let me get back to that in a second. Let me keep going. And then in these other sections that lay out, what vehicle sales and service are, we take out our ATV sales, and then we would create a new ATV sales section. So all that would be consistent with our treatment in code to date. And then our definitions, we would need to add ATV and ATV business. Now, before I go on to option 2, which is Kevin's, I'm going to show you what our Title V looks like. This is, let me do this also. So all of our general ordinances, this is stuff that just relates to anything that's not land use code, quite frankly, is found right here on our county website. We honestly don't do a great job of integrating this stuff. So we will update all these titles to be consistent with new changes to ordinances every so often, but every time an ordinance is passed that applies basically with all this sort of health and safety stuff, we just add the ordinance over here, and then in time we get around to integrating it into our titles. So our Title V, which is already there, regulates business licensing in the county. We did just pass an update, where we created essentially a placeholder for motor vehicles. So this chapter 5.02 is new. It will still need to be modified. So what you're seeing with the strike throughs in the red would be proposed modifications for yet another update to integrate the ATV regulations. So we would add, and this is just a super draft right now. No one has seen this. I drafted this today. It's super draft. We would be adding definitions for ATV and ATV businesses. And then the definition of ATV business would relate to our LUC sections and definitions. And then in this chapter 5.02, so far, also there was a change up there. That was just application requirements would include the certificate of compliance for ATV businesses that we talked through. And then this is how you would do the permit cap and the noise levels. So you would have a maximum number of licenses for ATV businesses. This is, yes, we can cap licenses. It's done quite frequently in state code. There are a few examples I know of in county ordinances as well. And we would actually, and I still need to insert this information, but based on communication with the clerk's office today, I think that this actually will say the office of the county clerk may issue 4 licenses for ATV rental, leasing, outfitting, and guide service, something like that. Because we don't distinguish in our land use code between motor vehicle and just general outfitting guide services and ATV businesses, the clerk's office actually doesn't have a great way right now that they're tracking it, because we don't have this separate ATV business. So they had to just go through their files again today. And unfortunately, the business licensing person who manages all that is out today. So the clerk was going through and trying to confirm our licenses and only came up with 4 in the county. And again, all of those were joint. So it's going to be a low number there, and that would cap. We'd be capped at our current level. That's my proposal. And then the maximum sound level says, hey, all these ATVs sold, written, driven, used, I need to work on that language, has to meet this requirement. And we would integrate an amortization schedule here as well, like I discussed. But I'm not ready to show you our noise ordinance, although we're very close to releasing a draft, and I do expect to discuss it at the next county commission meeting. But know that we've been working hard on the noise ordinance to update it to be more effective for noise enforcement against ATVs. My recommendation is going to be that we create a maximum sound pressure level at 92 dBA. that is after months of research and months of working with Cliff Kuntz, who's the director of Red with Respect, and also our Motorized Trail Committee, to come to a DBA that both the Motorized Trail Committee would support and also is reasonable. And so we've tested now about 8 ATVs the county has with Cliff and with the Hummer group, the McFarlands, and I want to thank them again for helping us test all these different ATVs by make, model, and year. And nearly every ATV on the market today is between 92 and 96 dBA. The 2 most popular models are between 94 and 96 dBA. So that's the Polaris Razor, and there's another one I'm forgetting the name of. So just so you know, we need to at least be below 94 just to make a difference on what is on the road today. Based on the feedback from Cliff and also the motorized community that I've been contacted or been in touch with, any ATV on the road today can modify their ATV and get below 92. So that would include your older models. Newer models have the ability to go below 92 dBA with this silencing. So in terms of the noise ordinance impact on all of our public ATV users, I don't feel comfortable making a recommendation below 92. I feel really good that we will have successful prosecutions of noise violations at 92 dBA. For our general public, right? We're limited by state law and coming up with that recommendation. With the noise requirements for businesses, we aren't limited in the same way. So we could reduce that dBA level if the Planning Commission and the County Commission is interested in doing that. So if we go below 92 dBA, because it would require upgrading to new machines and certain machines, and quite frankly, thinking out the quieter machines, I do recommend this amortization schedule. Okay, so that's all of that. And then coming to option 2, which is Kevin's preferred, is to create an overlay zone. And I'm going to let him take away that conversation. So I'll leave this up for now.
Christina, can I ask you a couple questions before we turn over to option 2 that might be specific to this? So the 2 questions that I've had in my mind, and if we are talking big, creative, radical ideas, the first problem is around it. When I talk to people, and over the years as I've talked to people, it's not just the individual ATV driving by, it's the group. It's the group of 8 of them, zoom, zoom, zoom. And I wonder, in addition to putting, reasonable restrictions on decibel, on noise level in the fleet, is there any way to contain the number that can be rented to any single group under this? So that's one question. And the second is, as we're looking at business licenses, and this is maybe a little bit trickier, I don't know what percentage of these ATVs and UTVs that are on the road, particularly the ones that cause a nuisance, are rentals versus people who bring their own from out of town or out of state. And people who bring their own from out of town and out of state, in many cases, are likely to be staying in one of our nightly rentals, which are licensed as a business in Grand County. And I wonder, this would be harder to enforce, but could be, a citizen enforcement type, with other types of code violations. I wonder if there's a way to provide a noise or a nuisance restrictions on nightly rentals, and after, so many violations, to potentially make that subject to penalty or even loss of the license. So those are 2 things I wanted to raise. I didn't know if you had any immediate thoughts, but I'm glad to see their notes go in the doc.
Yeah, so I really appreciate that about the violations and just general violations elsewhere, because I had forgotten that. That is something that we had discussed, is that we would require our ATV businesses to number in very large numbers that we would structure the numbering. And quite frankly, it would be something like County 1, County 2, up to however many ATV vehicles we have. And by the way, since January 1 of this year, we have required inventories for all of our motor vehicle businesses. So we do have those now, starting January 1. So they would all be numbered, so they'd be really easy to call in violations to the sheriff's office and say, hey, county vehicle 1 just sped by going 25 miles over, or hey, county vehicle 5 is, parked on the sidewalk at this overnight rental with 5 other vehicles, something like that. So it would make enforcement a lot easier. I think that would be my first recommendation in dealing with some enforcement issues, because right now it's almost impossible to figure out who these rental vehicles in particular are. We can't just run a license and figure it out too easy. But we can certainly play around more with, enforcement mechanisms. And then I do like the limiting the number of vehicles that could tour or, rent together in a group. I don't know, how we come up with that number. I am meeting this Thursday with the Motorized Trail Committee. So I can bring that up as well to Cliff and the members and see if they have any feedback. I completely agree with you that that is one of the biggest issues. And now, the next piece would be figuring out how many numbers or what number of vehicles we need to limit it to.
Mm-hmm. And, again, I know this is new to you, but do you have any thoughts or reactions around the fact that our nightly rentals are also, our overnight rentals are also business licensed in the county? So just as we're asking our outfitters to, as Kevin put it, which I really like, sort of spread the inconvenience around, the challenge with our business owners who operate nightly rentals is that their guests can do whatever they want, which, when you're staying in an area where you have a large concentration of those nightly rentals, which is what we did with the overlay, maybe there's not much you can do, but when there are rentals in either illegal overnight rentals, or I don't know, I'm just wondering if that's something that's come up, because it does seem like if you are an overnight renter, or, if you have a business license to provide that service to visitors to our county, and you aren't held to the same standards we're holding our outfitters of respect and, noise ordinance and so on, that just seems a little off kilter to where some of the larger impacts may be coming from. And that's a hunch. That's not a,
Right. And so would you envision that we would regulate the overnight accommodation license based on violations at the unit? Or you're saying, your vision is that if we caught one of your renters out violating our noise ordinance or a speed limit or whatever, that we could ding your overnight accommodations license and potentially revoke it?
Sure. I guess, and again, just plodding around in the dark here, but, we have noise ordinances. We can control for those sorts of nuisances and pollution to the neighbors. And I wonder if one way to get around the fact that these vehicles drive through residential neighborhoods at night, to place noise ordinance areas where the noise ordinance is higher in these residential areas after a certain time at night. And if you are a nightly rental business and we can tie, your guests to that violation, this obviously, I'm recognizing that this would be hard to enforce, but I'm just throwing big ideas out there to see if there's any piece of that could land. If you have a history of your neighbors calling in your guests for violating this noise ordinance, and we have decibel measures we can put outside your house and so on, would that be something you would be subject to restriction on? So I don't have anything clearer in my head than that, but I've just been trying to search for how do we reduce the harm caused by that particular issue, while we're also looking at spreading that inconvenience around across our outfitters to offset the inconvenience felt by our residents.
I'll think on that. And that would be the kind of thing we would put into our Title V. So just know that, because we are under somewhat of a time frame under code right now to try to get our land use code update done in 180 days. We don't have any limitation on our ordinance, our general ordinance update. So we can add that. I'll keep thinking on it. One thing to note is the noise ordinance, as I've drafted it and recommend it, does drop the dBA level by 5 at night. The point there is to chill, activity at night, and especially speeds at night. FYI, the commission hasn't weighed in on that yet, but it's definitely an interesting idea.
I was just going to comment on Emily's idea. I think, working in some kind of noise requirement to the nightly rental regs is an interesting idea, which I had not heard anyone bring up before. I could imagine there are enforcement difficulties, but I think it's definitely worth thinking about. I guess my understanding of it, just as we might say, like, if you're at a bed and breakfast, you're not allowed to have a bonfire in your backyard. Or, we have various rules that are supposed to limit the impact on the neighbors, and one of them could be, and if you've got vehicles staying there, they can't be super noisy. That's, I think, is that correct, Emily? That's roughly what you were suggesting?
Yeah, and I mean, in my mind, it would be a repeat offense. You can't control every issue, but
Okay.
if you are causing a continual nuisance through your inability to control your guests, then are you actually living up to the agreement you have with the county that is, part of your half of that license? So.
Well, and on that note, our old Title V about business licensing was really lame, and it didn't even require compliance with county law, state law, or federal law. And now it does. And it also didn't have any specifications about how to deny or revoke a business license, and now it does. So really, that's already there. I'm not opposed to making it really clear as to overnight accommodations, what the expectations are, but at least we have an ordinance now that gives us some meat, and we didn't have that until 2 weeks ago.
So Chrissy, I had kind of
and getting better all the time.
I had a technical comment on what you presented. So you put ATV sales together with the ATV rentals and outfitting, but would it make more sense just not to, I mean, if you're selling a vehicle, that's not intrinsically noisy. And I just wanted, for my simplify things, to take that out and just talk about the tours and the rentals as the category we're trying to regulate here.
Yep. No, I think I expect to do that. Like I said, I didn't know until 352 that we don't even have any ATV companies that are renting and leasing. We certainly don't have anyone selling them that I know of. I was really just, as a first draft, mirroring what we already have. So yes, I actually expect my recommendation for the hearing in 2 weeks will be one category that is a merger of rental and guiding.
Okay. Did you want me to talk about the overlay zone idea?
Go for it. I'll come back to this.
So, an alternative, and I just threw this out. I was trying to think of the simplest thing possible, and I may not have succeeded. But since we regulate overnight accommodations with an overlay zone, we could do something parallel to that with UTV rentals. The two possible advantages I can think of to that approach, one is if we think there's some kind of political sensitivity, or around, if we don't like the idea that we're a community that's banned ATV rentals altogether, or new ones, if we have an overlay zone, that gives us the advantage of expanding them in the future, and in particular, it might be that in certain locations they don't have the impact that, and where they're not likely to drive through residential neighborhoods. And a second one is it just gives us more flexibility about the numbers, and maybe we want a reduction in overnight businesses, and we can't do that with a cap. But I'm not, at this point, I don't think that's one of the main issues. So I don't have a whole lot to say about that.
And my feedback, the reason I don't like it is it's quite complicated in my opinion, and I'm not even sure we have enough time to, get to the mapping process. We only have what we think is 4 ATV businesses, and I'll definitely have that information firmed up by the public hearing. What's interesting about the 4 we have, well, let me show you the spreadsheet I'm working on. And again, this is our business licensing agent at the county is out. We don't have a way to tag right now, since we don't have a separate ATV business category of our land use code. We don't track them that way. So our clerk spent the time today to go through the business licensing regs and pull this up. He gave me 4 names, but Mad Bro, from what I can tell, does not rent or guide or offer tours with ATVs. So I need to confirm that, but I don't actually think that's an ATV business. So we have 3 shown. I'm pretty sure Rory Paxman talked about owning an ATV business. So I assume he has one at his, the spread across the river, but I'm not sure. So I think we're missing 1 here. But we have the one that's in the trailer that's across from the South Maverick. My Google Maps cannot find this location, but the website says it's run out of the Moab Reservation Center. And then this one's behind the feed store, and the county city line is really weird right there. But this property actually looks to me like it's in the city. Now the city and the county actually honor each other's licenses. So it could be that Moab side by side doesn't realize that, and they're permitted in the city and the county, and this is actually a city business. But it could be we only have two businesses. I'm really not sure yet. But just so you know, to me, it's just really clean to cap the number we have now, if that's of interest to people. That is the gist I'm getting from the commission, that we want to cap these businesses. We're allowed to legally do that. So that's just, you know, to me, the overlay is just overly complicated for what we have, how much time we have, all the stuff. Okay, I'm going to quit screen sharing. And
Do you have a sense of the relative fleet sizes of those different businesses? Or do we even have an estimate of the size of the fleet in the county?
no, I'll have that. I'll ask for that from the clerk's office, and I'll have that for the public hearing as well.
Because I wonder if that isn't even a different way versus controlling licenses, if we could permit per vehicle and control through that.
My thinking is, because the city contemplated that, is especially right now trying to limit the fleet size. And my thinking is, if they're quiet, do we care? And also, you know, especially right now, the city was mostly interested in putting a freeze on expansions of the fleet size. And my thinking was, let the market control that, because it's a really big risk for businesses to be buying more machines right now, not knowing where we're going to end up on these regulations. You know, these conversions aren't that cheap, especially if they're buying new and quieter machines. So my thinking is regulating the fleet size isn't worth it, but you know, that's for you guys to decide ultimately. So I'll
Just
add
a quick
that.
question.
Yeah.
I know the city's working on this as well. Are your efforts here, is the city looking at maybe adopting some of these for their own code, or are they just doing something separately entirely? I'm just curious, you know, how, I know we kind of want to work together, but you know, where do we stand with that?
Yeah, I can address that a little bit. I do definitely talk about these things a lot with city council members, just because I do think we ultimately would like to end up with similar regulations if possible. The city is on a different time frame, and so they don't face this April 20th deadline that we are facing, so they're kind of behind us.
Why don't they, Kevin?
Excuse
They
me?
don't have, why is that? Because they don't have any regulation there.
No, they're
Land use code
taking,
at all?
they decided that the October 20th joint resolution didn't count as formally initiating a change to the land use code, and what they wanted to do was pass, one of these temporary things like I emailed you the other day. So they basically, I think this meeting or the next meeting, they're gonna start a 6-month clock ticking, and that's based on their planning staff and attorney's recommendation. So the city folks read the law differently than you do, so.
Well, and it is something I'm looking into. I just haven't had a chance to focus on it. So for now, we're focusing on just that original timeframe.
Yeah. But it is something we can maybe think about in the county, that we might be able to restart our clock and not have to rush quite so much, though I don't think we should dawdle either.
Yeah, I would just chime in that I don't think postponing any action on this is in the interest of the community right now. So I actually appreciate having a deadline. I have a quick question, which is by that same test, the SAE J1287 test, what is the decibel of a standard passenger vehicle?
I don't know the standard, but I have a 2017 Toyota Tacoma, and I measured it with Cliff Coots has a type 3 noise meter, and type 1 is law enforcement grade. We actually at the county just ordered one today. So we're experimenting with type 3, but it's accurate. And so my truck measured at 80 dBA. That's with this. So this stationary test was created by the Society of Automotive Engineers. It's been well vetted in other states and integrated into state statutes and other places, including California, and also been used in successful prosecution. And so it's a tailpipe test. It's not a total vehicle noise test. It's 20 inches off the tailpipe. And then there's this booklet that literally has every make, model, and year of every vehicle. And so you go to that booklet and you look up your make, model, and year. It tells you your it's called a revving RPM, but it's not. It's for example, red line in my truck is 6,000 RPM, but the test only requires I rev to 3,000 while I'm stationary, which is assumed like average driving conditions. And so at 3,000 RPMs at 20 inches, mine was 80 dBA. They say that to the human ear, and I'm probably going to screw this up, so Kevin, correct me. To the human ear, noise doubles every 3 dBA. So it is a huge freaking difference between 80 dBA and 92. And I'll tell you this, and I'm from Georgia, and I have like the motorized hum in my blood. I just do. I haven't been as annoyed with ATV noise as a lot of people. But I got there last fall. Let me tell you, I got there. But I'm out there and I'm measuring all these ATVs, about 8 of them, and they're all too dang loud. They just are. And so even at 92, I don't want to promise that it's going to fix everything, but it is really going to address a huge amount of noise in town as well. And it feels good as a first step in terms of our general noise ordinance. But I'm also, because even 92 is too dang loud, I very much support us reducing that level for our businesses because we can, because we have more power to do that.
I wonder on that with the question of whether to give a 3-year grace period or not, whether we could require initially 92 decibels sort of immediately and then give them 3 years to get down to a more reasonable, like 80-ish decibel range that's more comparable to passenger cars.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Cliff
Yeah,
Coots.
that's an easy one because we're talking about, there might be a noise ordinance that has the same 90 dB, 92 dB standards.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
Um,
Cliff Coots said that it costs about $500 to take, your average ATV that's rating around 94 to 96 dBA and get it to 92.
And based on that, I would say that with rentals, anywhere from $200 or $300 a pop, that's 1.5 to 2 rentals paying for that. So that doesn't really dissuade me from thinking that should be required pretty much.
I wanted to go back to your original question about, tailpipe tests and cars and that kind of comparison. And it is in fact very tricky because a tailpipe test is measuring, exhaust noise or things coming out near there. I was there when they tested Christina's truck and it was much louder because her exhaust is very quiet. Most of the engine from her truck was actually coming from the front of the car, the engine. And so, translating a tailpipe test to the real world noise that we actually care about is pretty tricky. Both because vehicles produce noise in lots of different ways, some of which have nothing to do with the tailpipe. And also because, scaling sound from 20 inches to 50 feet, just the pure physics of that is tricky. So I think the thing to do would just be do some experiments, find some UTVs that are roughly, the quietest ones we can find, and they're not much louder than passenger cars, and see how they score on a tailpipe test. And that might inform how we want to set the level if the goal is to make them as something that doesn't stand out from the usual background noise on a road.
And my last question on the tailpipe test would be if you can approximate like speed, because I know that decibel levels of pretty much all vehicles vary very widely with speed. So since we're kind of dealing mostly with like 25, 30 mile an hour or 15 mile an hour with the lowering, if there's a way to also kind of hone in on that.
I don't think so. I mean, as Chrissy pointed out, they do the tailpipe test at a fixed RPM typically. So it's not you're not really able to get different answers for different speeds. So again, it's an input, but there is certainly a correlation between how ATVs score on a tailpipe test and how much noise they cause in the real world. So it's still a useful test, even if the relationship between these tailpipe dBs and whether we can hear it inside our living room is a little bit complicated.
Sure.
I know Garish has his video off, but he wanted to say something. So Garish, are you able to hear us?
Yeah, thank you, Emily. I've got a couple of questions. But one comment, and I think Kevin has already sort of addressed it, but a lot of the noise from ATVs, as you probably know, doesn't come out of the exhaust. It comes from the engine and transmission. And I wonder if we could be looking forward to having instead of a static test where the machine is stationary and you just rev the engine to a certain RPM. If we couldn't have like a little test track, like between going up one of the steep grades towards Sand Flats on the Sand Flats Road, and maybe it would be a 20-foot DBH test to really better approximate what kind of noise these machines make. So that's just food for thought, and maybe a future evolution of this ordinance. The second thing is.
Can I stop you there, Garish? And let's talk about that for a second, and then we'll come back to your second. So violation of the local noise ordinance and violation of a somewhat vague state law that says all vehicles must be equipped, operated, and maintained so as not to make excessive noise. And then it doesn't define what that means. Okay, so that's what our noise ordinance is now going to define, what excessive motor vehicle noise is. That is a criminal proceeding, even if we are giving out infractions. And so we have a high burden to meet. And in criminal court, you are bound by the rules of evidence, which requires standardized tests. And the only standardized test that's been developed and used in successful prosecution across the country is the stationary test. And so that's why right now, and it is an evolution, and it is, I feel like, we're launching into the experimentation phase and we're all ready for it. And let's go make some case law. But I have spent 6 months of a whole lot of time on this. I've consulted with the city attorney, with our lead prosecutor in the county, with the police chief, and with the sheriff, and none of us are comfortable ticketing anyone for a violation outside of the stationary test. And so there's a couple of ways you can then enforce the stationary test to get to it. And one is a checkpoint, and one will be some, noise metering from afar that gives you probable cause to pull someone over.
I understood Garish's suggestion differently. It sounds like you were addressing using a test like that as part of our noise ordinance, but if instead it's just part of what ATV rental folks have to do before they're allowed to rent a machine, then that's kind of a different issue. There's no criminal penalties that we're involving. They either pass the test to get their business license or they don't. So I think the issues are a little bit different there. But I think Garish was careful to say this is for the future. I think the tailpipe test is just much more convenient. We know how to do it. When you do drive-by noise, you've got like just a split second to get the reading or not. Whereas it's stationary, you can sit there for a long time until everything's done well. So as imperfect as a tailpipe test is, I suspect for these kinds of pre-clearing the fleets ahead of time before they go out into the field, I think it's probably a good tool, though we should always be looking for better ones. So.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. That's a good clarification of what I had in mind. The second thing is I think rental companies should be paying an additional fee for the time it takes for whoever is going to administer the tailpipe test. So that might be something to include in the fee schedule and in the ordinance.
Yeah, it is in the ordinance, but that's a good point. We need to tie it into the fee schedule. I do specify they have to pay the sheriff's office to do the test.
Correct. Thank you. That's all I had. Thank you very much.
Great.
Anyone have any other comments?
I have one last, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead, Josie.
Okay. I have one last comment, just that I would be in favor of both capping permits as well as fleet sizes personally. And partially because I don't think ATVs have gotten louder in the last year, but I think by the sheer numbers they have. And so I think numbers do matter. And I'm worried that by not setting any caps on fleet sizes, we're just leaving a huge kind of wild card out there. So that's just my 2 cents on that particular.
And we don't know what these fleets look like. I'll have that information for the public hearing, but would your vision be to cap it at our current fleet size based on the noise you hear, or do you have any feedback on that?
I mean, there's so many unknowns as far as how many, and I also agree that, doing this at the county level is definitely good, but it's one part of many, because I do think most of the well, a lot of the businesses affecting residences in town are city businesses. And so that, you know, definitely has to be managed as well, I think, for a lot of people's lives to change at all. And I think there's still a big question of how many vehicles are personal vehicles versus how many are rental vehicles. And I don't have a good gauge of that. I can't always tell. So I would be curious what current fleet sizes are. I would be curious what the average number of ATVs going into Sand Flats per day are, you know, those kinds of metrics, so that we can actually start to gauge more or less how things are evening out. Because it's possible that I would want to set the cap lower than what they currently are, in order to actually make things change and not stay the same.
So I think there's an interaction between this idea of regulating the fleet size or not. And Chrissy mentioned an idea of phasing in this tailpipe test limit, or put things on a trailer over several years. Personally, I'm not in favor of that. I think it's been long-term county policy that we want local control to, not allow street legal ATVs on our streets. And if we ever got that control, we would immediately say no UTVs on the streets, which would affect rental companies along with everybody else. So I think what's being proposed here, if these DB limits that Chrissy outlined were to go into effect in a matter of months rather than a matter of years, it's actually more lenient than something we've been trying to do in the state legislature for years. So I think, if you've got a noisy UTV, it's not worthless. You can still put it on a trailer and take it to, lots of different places. So, and I think if we do that, if these limits come quickly, then there's no need for fleet size limits, because any UTV that's on the streets is relatively quiet. And I think that's one of the virtues, because it is pretty, the city just on a temporary basis tried to regulate fleet size numbers, and it got to be a big mess. Collecting the information is hard, and there's lots of issues. So I think it's one of the benefits of phasing these restrictions in quickly, is that then we don't have to worry about fleet size.
Yeah, I am concerned about the enforcement concept or issues related with fleet size, but to counter Kevin's comments, because he and I love to fight with each other, I want our ATV businesses to be our allies. I think it's really important that they are, so that we don't get harmful state legislation, because believe me, they're hovering on this, and I'm very scared of statewide legislation that harms us. So far, our ATV businesses, at least what's been communicated to me, are very supportive of the process we are going through. A lot of our ATV community thinks ATVs are too loud and there's too much going on. Especially with this permit concept, which we've talked about from the very beginning, we even talked about in that early October meeting last year when we did the moratorium, it becomes an asset that they can sell, just like a river permit, and they're grandfathered in like their site. So I think we need to be reasonable about cost to our ATV community to comply. Now they're going to have this 92 dBA level that everyone's subject to. So my feedback is just be really careful of that, and let's listen to our ATV businesses. I don't even know what complying at the 92 level means for these folks in terms of the actual immediate financial outlay. And I'm sure I'll hear more about that on Thursday. So I'll probably have more information for you at the public hearing. And then there was something else what Josie said I was going to comment on, but I don't remember.
So I had one more comment on this topic, which is I would hesitate to predict how the county commission, if they were voting today, would come down on this issue of a quick phase in versus a slower one. And so I think it maybe makes sense for the planning commission, when you're developing these, to have both options there, so that can be decided at a later, and investigate both, and ultimately the county commission will decide. And if you want to make a recommendation, great. But I think there are people who would support either of them. So.
Can I ask a question? Is there a reason, so I'm understanding that we're saying, comply with this decibel level or the dBA test, or trailer to the trailhead. Is there a reason? I'm assuming it's because it's not within reasonable affordability for the companies that are renting out these ATVs, but is there a reason we couldn't just set the dBA fairly low and then essentially be like, you have to trailer your ATV rentals to the trailhead? Or is that just too unreasonable for the companies, and that's why we're not exploring that option?
I'm not sure I understand. So the proposal was, or a proposal is to set the DB level relatively low and then give them two options: use a trailer or, get quiet UTVs. Are you suggesting something different from that?
Well, I guess I was understanding it as them getting a lower sound, and then people would still be driving them all over town in large brigades and trains unless we change that rule. But I'm curious. I'm trying to think how to word this. I guess I was thinking that was more of a attainable sound level. Does that make sense? What we were asking them to do is like lower it to 92 or a lower between 80 or whatever. So therefore giving them the option to still be able to drive them around town and stuff on the streets. And the option otherwise would be to trailer them to the trailhead. And so what I'm asking is, could we just set that limit low to begin with and ask them to and essentially steering them towards trailering all of the rentals to the trailheads?
All meaning even the quiet ones.
Well, it would encourage trailering. So I understand what you're saying. And that is what I was going to talk about, was the sand flats numbers. And Josie brought that up because it ties in with trailering and the fact that that's going to be a big impact on BLM and BLM land. So, right. So they haven't been, the growth in our visitation is not keeping up with trailer space. So we just, quite frankly, don't have enough space to trailer, I think, even all of our rentals, but it is hard to know what's going on. So at Sand Flats last year, they did do an informal study of vehicle type. And within the ATVs, how many of those were rentals versus tours versus private vehicles? And they said the huge majority going into Sand Flats are rentals and tours. And I don't remember what the split was between them, but I do think the number one was ATV rentals, number two were tours, and number three were privates. That's though going into Sand Flats, right? Which is close to town. It's on all the maps. You can't get lost, even though there can be advanced trails up there. Andrea does think that there are likely a lot, the percentage of rental and tours in Sand Flats is probably much higher in the rest of the county. So I don't think it really gives us a sense of who's driving around, but I do think it gives us a sense of the noise in town, right? Especially in East Moab, where we have the most significant noise issues. And then we have started a conversation with the BLM about, hey, if we require trailering, what does that mean for you guys? And it really depends on the trails, right? So at like the Poison Spider Trailhead, they're like, no way, NH, that can happen. There's just no space for it. Up at Sand Flats, there's a few different proposals, everything from using certain space near the toll booth for, dropping people off is no issue. It's that the tour company would have to sit there with the trailer and wait. It could be 10 minutes, it could be 2 hours for people who aren't they're not ATV experts to come back. So it's hard to guesstimate how long they're going to take. So you're going to have a lot of trailers just sitting there. We've also talked about, because we have some county land, there's city land down on Sand Flats. We could develop that for trailering. So we have started those conversations, and just know it's very complicated. That's all I can tell you.
Yeah, I want to add just one thing to that too, because in my ideal world, we're, at the very least back to trailering the way that it used to be, and we didn't hear them driving around town. But I also think an unintended consequence of using trailers or using, low decibel limits as a stick to kind of get people to the carrot of trailering, it means that those vehicles on the trailers don't necessarily need to be as quiet. And I think one thing to keep thinking about too is also the effects in the backcountry, or even in a place like Sand Flats, which is kind of backcountry. And I think one of the ideal things about requiring low decibel limits for ATVs that are still driving through town is that they're also going to be quiet when they're on the trails. And I think that there is benefit to that as well. So I feel really torn about this, but I'm kind of seeing that, town is really important, and that's what most of the kind of furor is about right now. But the backcountry is still getting hard hit as well, and the trails.
I understand that point, and I'm someone who cares about the backcountry, but I do think it makes sense to discuss those issues separately and not get them mixed together. And part of it's because I think when our goal is to reduce noise in residential neighborhoods, I think we are in very, very strong ground from like a political public messaging thing, point of view. When we start talking about that, we as a county or as a city want to, control noise levels on federal lands, that gets a little bit squishier. I mean, certainly we can express our opinion just like anyone else can, but that's ultimately the BLM's job. So I do think the county should work with the BLM to try to reduce that, but I hesitate to mix that issue in with this thing about noise in residential neighborhoods, where I think the decision should really be a no-brainer. It's just not acceptable to have this noise in our residential neighborhoods, and we're just going to do whatever it takes to solve that. I think once we get to backcountry noise, the other side, there's more valid points to go around. So I would have those debates separately.
I think I agree with that too, because I mean, to my first point that I would rather everything was trailered. And I guess my other thought on that is knowing that there is strain on space for trailers at trailheads. I wonder if that's a natural cap on fleet sizes and whether those could be formalized more as just sort of, this is what our capacity is.
I mean, the recreation industry of any type has both natural constraints and industry constraints. I mean, there's only so many people allowed to go rafting in certain stretches of the river to, decrease impact. And that's seen as a free market solution because there's trade-offs everybody's making, and it gives rise to outfitters. You can get people down in more organized ways. And, I think that the language of trying to find these incentives is very positive because it's not outright regulation. For all we know, this sort of ordinance could lead to a rise of entrepreneurs who do provide trailering to and from the trailhead. And there may be an entire value to be gained that hasn't even been explored here in Grand County simply by having some reasonable caps on the negative externalities of these vehicles. So I think that we should be talking about that as much as we know that the state is watching this. I hope the state is also watching the fact that we are looking for these market-based solutions and not flat out regulations. And we should expect to see trade-offs that lead to innovation and entrepreneurialism as we offset the cost to residents, right? So I hope that that's the language we continue to use. I had a couple of last questions, and then maybe everyone can have a chance for sort of their own final thoughts if they have them, and then we can move on. One is I love that we're already talking to the city, even if they are a little bit behind us. To the extent possible, it would be wonderful to get a sense of how closely the city thinks they may hone to the county's, ordinances or choices by the time we get to our next meeting. So okay, awesome. Because that way we're moving together. I feel very conflicted about all of this. I, on one hand, have young children, and I feel nervous when my kids get off the bus in May because of all of the UTVs that we have. Groups of 5, 6, 7 of them come flying down the road that our cul-de-sac tees up to because they park their trailers on Spanish Valley Drive and then get to the highway. And it scares me, and my children can't enjoy the neighborhood. At the same time, we own a sport boat. We get out and we enjoy revving up our 50 horsepower motor on the flat water. And there are people in town who really dislike that use in the flat water sections of the daily. And I have a lot of sympathy for people who recreate in different ways, and there's all sorts of reasons why people choose their vehicles. But there's two things that really stand out. The first is when we're in our motorboat, we still have regulations. When we are near paddleboarders and other boats, we have to slow down and we have to keep distance, and you can't wake the ramp. And I feel as though, this is where I think coordination with the city would be useful, because this isn't as much an issue in the county, but it seems like we should be dropping the decibel level considerably, especially at specific times of day around schools and around the hospitals, like in town, having the charter school right there off of 4th East. I can imagine when school is letting out, if that decibel level dropped down to 80, or 85, reasonable for vehicles that are passenger vehicles, but likely to disincentivize people breaking that ordinance and driving a louder, more fast vehicle nearby. I'd like to see that explored. And certainly in the county, probably near popular trailheads as well, would be an interesting thing to explore. I had one more and I lost it. So I'd love to see us looking at that. The last thing is, I think it's very interesting to hear those numbers out of Sand Flats, and I would really love to explore that a little bit further. From what I see from our outfitters here in town and in the city, there might be frustration, but generally speaking, there is partnership and there's an interest. And I think even back to 2015, when our state senator came down and spoke to a community meeting, and one of the more outspoken outfitters was there looking for reasonable ways that we could offset the potential harm, which became the real harm of this law that passed in the State House. And I am really interested, especially at the county level, in looking into the harm. Like, I am far less concerned about somebody who's already trailered their vehicle from out of state or 400 miles from within the state than having to have the burden of get their vehicle trailered to the trailhead. Like, they are not a member of our community. They are not producing economic gain. If they are renting, that's one thing, but if they are bringing their own vehicle down. And when I look at the forums and I look at the type of rhetoric that's online, well, a few bad apples stands as the truth in this as every other situation. There is a really nasty, like, I want to come down and make these people hurt type of feel. And I don't know how pervasive that is. And I don't know how much that is growing, but it's a real problem. And that's where I don't feel a lot of, kindness towards people who want to come down and be unkind in a place where they're recreating, that children live and families live. And so the combination of higher restrictions around sensitive areas at sensitive times, especially related to residential neighborhoods that are likely to have a lot of through traffic or have existing nightly rentals or other type, usage that would be likely to attract these vehicles. I would really like to see the county look, and even if that happens outside of the 180 day window, I think that we should be getting especially creative there and working with our outfitters who, honestly, the less people bringing their vehicles down, the more demand for their vehicles here in town, the less competition at those trailheads, the better the general sense of community and working with them. And I think we can fix some of these larger issues with that type of cooperative as well. So there's my 10 cents on the issue.
I know I'm speaking out of turn, but I just wanted to comment on one small thing you said, Emily, about maybe some UTV riders having bad attitudes or saying things we don't like on message boards. I don't think we should personalize this. I assume that every UTV rider is a wonderful person and they're just coming down here to have fun, and they're not deliberately causing us harm. And I think it's really just a question about machines and decibel levels, and people's intentions and things like that don't come into it. Similarly, I think owners of UTV businesses, I'm assuming they're all wonderful people who deserve to have their business flourish. And I think if we had two different solutions that make our neighborhoods quiet, I would definitely choose the one that's easier on the UTV rental folks.
I fully agree with you. And let me just clarify, I am not at all, I know people who own these vehicles who enjoy them. I have friends who have come into town and rented them and enjoyed them. And like I said, we have a motorboat, and there are people who don't like the fact that we get out on the flat water. And I am very sensitive to the fact that recreation comes in many forms. What I'm saying is for people who don't have a vested interest in building a community with their neighbors, there is, maybe a higher likelihood of that popping up. And that's not the reason in of itself. But I do feel that when I have talked to people who live here, who own these types of vehicles, who like their friends and family to get them when they're here, who run outfitters, I see an overwhelming sense of let's find a solution that works for everybody. Let's find a solution to this problem. And I think that that's wonderful. So I would really like to look at, I believe we can partner through very reasonable solutions with outfitters, and that there's an incentive for them to work with the community. We don't have that same relationship to people who come in and bring their own vehicles in. And so I just have a slightly different threshold for being able to feel more comfortable taking larger steps forward to offset the harm caused by that particular use and that particular user. That's all I was clear. But I think that's a great comment, and I think you're absolutely right, and I fully agree with you there. Okay.
Hold on quickly, because Emily said a lot, and I just want to quick comments. One, I didn't follow up, but Sandflats is taking their informal survey to an official survey this year. So at least that's the Sandflats. We will have more information. Even by the summer. And one category I forgot to mention is trailers. So they just categorize trailers as a whole separate thing, because most of them are closed. So they can't tell if those are motorcycles or dirt bikes or ATVs, but FYI. Two, I really love the school zone being lower. And I feel very comfortable with that because school zones are treated differently all throughout state code. I will look at whether I feel comfortable lowering the DBA for other sensitive areas and how we would define that, but I like that idea. The other thing to know is, and I appreciate both comments and I agree with Kevin absolutely, but there is a 2019 recreation study that was, I think it was prepared by state parks in coordination with maybe the governor's office, 2019, and it showed that ATV tourism in the state of Utah was only 15% of our recreationalists, whereas I feel like the impact is way huger than that. And there's also been studies that show that ATV tourists spend the least amount of money in Moab than our other tourists. I will try to get that information because I looked recently and I couldn't find it, but that has stuck in my brain. And so, you know, I appreciate all the comments, but I think that also is important to keep in mind.
I had a quick question. Emily's comment kind of reminded me of, so you had said that by the noise ordinance, the decibel limits drop by 5 decibels at night.
I remembered I incorrectly described that. My proposal is 5 for general land use, parties and tools and stuff. And then I was experimenting between 2 and 3 dBA for motor vehicles.
Okay. And what would the hours of that be, or what is nighttime hours by our law?
So our noise ordinance already describes restricted hours, and there's winter restricted hours and summer restricted hours, and I don't have it right in front of me, but it's something like in the winter 9 p.m. to 7 a.m. and then the summer 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. something like that. That's already in our noise ordinance, so I haven't proposed a change to those hours, but that's something that the noise ordinance won't go through you guys because it's health and safety, but that's something the commission might tune into, that they want to tinker with those hours.
Got it. That's great. And I do like Emily's comment because I feel like similar to having school specific speed limits, it would just make sense to have sort of school specific decibel limits as well. And then to the point about UTV users and rentals, I kind of want to echo a lot of things of sort of working with rentals in town, especially those that are longstanding local businesses. I think there's a lot of, there's like UTV enthusiasts, and there's like the sort of heavy lobbying groups, and there's a lot of different sort of types of people that are in the mix here. And I do agree that it's probably in our best interest, and also just generally civil, to be trying to not make things excessively difficult for rental businesses in town. But I also want to recognize that this is a negotiation and they are negotiating for their best interests. And so I would really recommend that we be strong negotiators as well for the community interest in that back and forth.
Yeah, I'll just add my 2 cents. I've really enjoyed the discussion. I think it's been pretty fruitful with some great ideas. I do particularly like the idea about the schools. I do also just want to call attention to you, Christina, and Kevin. I really like that the theme I'm hearing is like, how can we be solution focused to a level that inconveniences these businesses but doesn't cripple them. I think that's admirable, and I think that's a good foot to put forward. Now, as we talk, one thing I would like to add, we've talked a little bit about fleet sizes and caravanning convoys, however you want to call it. I would say just a suggestion might be something along these lines, that if we do have the level at say 92, which seems like it's still very loud, maybe we could with local businesses implement some sort of a convoy between more of the sensitive hours like morning, and say, you've got to split your group size in 2. If it was going to be 6, split it out into groups of 3 and do 2 waves. And it doesn't have to be all the way out of Grand County, but just to an area that affects less residential homes, really. So that way, I think it would be a pretty minor inconvenience as far as logistics, maybe 1 additional personnel. I think it would be livable for businesses. And it wouldn't be a hurdle they couldn't overcome. So that way, at least you're getting, we all know a wave of 6 or 8 is far louder than a wave of 3 or 4. And so that might just dampen a little bit while not incurring as much of that financial burden of lowering every vehicle down to a certain decibel meter. So just a thought, throwing that out there. Maybe it sticks, maybe not. Thanks.
All right. Just want to second the the thank you for all the thoughtfulness. I know that this is a very sensitive topic, and it's obvious that the solutions that are being explored are really meant to create positive outcomes, and as well as protecting the community, because people who live in our residential neighborhoods don't have the ability to voice their opinion as loud as the vehicle driving by their yard. And so I think this is a wonderful way to aggregate action while also moving towards policy that actually creates a sounder community. Rick, I see you. You're muted. There you go.
Wow. So I have one of these. I live out in the valley. And so I've driven it down Spanish Valley Road and Spanish Trail. The 15-mile-an-hour speed limit makes a big difference. It doesn't make near as much noise, takes a lot longer, but I think that's going to be a big help. One of the things I notice if I'm out on my porch at 11 o'clock at night, these guys are still running all over the place. And I think most of those are not rentals. They're ones that are brought into Rim Village and over by the golf course at those condos. And most of the really noisy ones are from out of town. They're not the rental guys. I wonder what the pleasure is running around at midnight, but that's not me, I guess. So, but I think a lot of the ideas you have are good, and, you know, not knocking the businesses down all the way with caps and stuff. I think those are the right approaches. And but I do think the speed limits, you know, if they're enforced, would be a big thing. So my comments there. And if you're going at 15 miles an hour, the further out you take that, the more it will incentivize people to trailer theirs, because it does take a long time to go anywhere at 15 miles an hour. So that's my comments.
One thing I think would be helpful, and I don't know y'all's protocol, so I don't know if this is just a straw poll, but working on the overlay will be a ton of work, including mapping. So do you guys want to see that proposal, or are we focusing on the permit cap and the CUP with these regulations we've been discussing? Can we narrow in on that?
I think that's a great request. So just straw poll on interest of going further down the road. We'll do option 1 and we'll do option 2. This is not binding. This means only just to provide guidance to county staff to be most effective with their time. Is everyone comfortable with us doing a straw poll for the sake of discussion? Okay, so all who would like to see option 1 move forward, you can vote for both. You don't have to vote for either or. All who would like to see option 1 move forward, raise your hand. If you are muted, say aye or post. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so option 1, we would like to see explored. Option 2, maybe Josie, maybe Steve. All right, so it seems like it's a little tepid. Any comments there to clarify for staff?
I think just the time and resources on it. Sounds like we want to really push this forward with the impending due date that we have. So it's purely a resource thing. And in a world of infinite time and resource, I'd be all for it. That's my concern.
I do think that maybe the overlay option is not as difficult to write down as Christina thinks, so maybe we can discuss that after the meeting. But I also,
if you want to write it and propose it, that's great, but I don't.
but I also think option 1 is a viable option, so I'm not.
Yeah, I'm still kind of trying to parse through in my brain the benefits of the overlay over option 1, because I feel like one thing Kevin mentioned was that it might be more politically palatable because it implies that there could be more growth. But it seems like with option 1, especially with working with existing businesses actually would probably like to be capped just de facto. So it seems equally palatable politically. And so I'm trying to think like what the other obvious benefits of option 2 would be over option 1.
I think the only benefit, and Kevin and I talked about this, is if there was, locations where there were existing businesses that you really didn't feel like were appropriate, and you wanted a path forward to abandoning that license in that location, that would be a reason to do it. but given that we only have 3 or 4 of these licenses, and to me, they're in appropriate places, they're all in highway, commercial, or general business. As far as I know, I guess Paxman, if he has a separate ATV business, might be resort special or something. But the ones that we've identified so far are all in our purely commercial zone. So I just don't see the benefit to doing that. We can always increase the permit number later. You know, it's not a forever thing. So
And I
One
suppose
thing
we
on
could also
that,
reduce the permanent label, so if some of these places cease to do business, you know, they wouldn't be replaced by something else.
we did redefine resort special during the small area planning process to make it very specific to that one, that 313-191 area, with resort commercial being more close to that area where Paxman's business may be. So sort of small thing, but we might want to just pick this up while we're looking at it. That could be one that we also address, because there was not overwhelming, there was not interest in seeing that type of usage in that small area plan region.
I think maybe Chrissy
That's
meant
good to know.
resort commercial when she said resort special.
I did. I don't have them clear in my brain, but that's still good to know, because in my table, I think in one of them, I did put conditional use permit in resort special as
You
a.
know, I remember when I was on the planning commission, we explicitly considered UTV rentals out there, and I think there was that was not we recommended against that. So.
Abby, and then we'll move forward.
I was just going to say that the code publishing company that we work with just confirmed that they've made all the updates from the small area plan. So anyways, so Christina, when you were doing research, if the resort commercial or resort special wasn't reflecting all those updates, they are now. So.
All right. Well, thank you so much for this. So it sounds like we'll be having a public hearing for this at our next meeting, and I appreciate you aligning with the city beforehand as well, and just for all the hard work that has gone into this. And I know that it's a very difficult topic, so just appreciation.
Thank you, Christina and Kevin.
Absolutely. All right. So this moves us on. Now, this was appropriately noticed. However, it's a typo in the packet. The Dark Skies Land Use Code update is a public hearing. So it was noticed appropriately. Is there anybody? Sorry. So what we're going to do is we're going to ask for a staff report. We'll ask for Christina to weigh in. Then we'll open the public hearing. If anybody would like to speak, you'll be welcome to speak as part of this process. After closing the hearing, we will continue discussion and then provide a recommendation vote. So Chrissy, are you taking this one, I assume, as well?
I think I am. So I'm not looking at your permit materials, but just off the cuff, we have a dark skies ordinance. It's somewhat comprehensive, but what we realized in the general session this year is that it did not expressly prohibit digital billboards or changing messaging signs. So there were 2 billboard bills run that thankfully neither one of them passed, but we expect them to come back. Okay, so let me back up. Our land use code no longer allows billboards, but the way these billboard bills were written was that for existing billboards that are vested as non-conforming uses, a county or a city could not prohibit the conversion of existing billboard to a digital or otherwise changing billboard. And although it would be really hard to get a digital billboard approved in our dark skies ordinance, and reading it myself, I was not comfortable that we were safe under these billboard bills. One of them did exempt scenic byways, so that would include the River Road, and that would include from 70 to Moab, but it wouldn't include the Highway 70, and it wouldn't include south of town. And the other one didn't include any exemption even for scenic byways. The way that the proposal you have in front of you is written is that it does apply to not just billboards, but all signs. Now that's different than, say, an open sign that's lit up, right? That's not digital. We're talking about LED technology, or an open sign that would say like open, and then it would flip, and then it would say something else and flip, and it catches your eye. So this does prohibit all of those in the county. It does exempt temporary signs for safety. So for example, our, mask signs that are on the highway, that would still be there. Fire signs, that kind of stuff is exempted. It's pretty straightforward. So if you have any questions based on the comments, or the revisions, let me know.
All right, are there any questions for Chrissy before we open up the hearing? Okay, so I will open up a public hearing at 5:34 for the discussion around the Dark Skies Land Use Code update. If there's anybody here who would like to make a comment, please post in chat and we'll ask you to come off of mute and make your comment. All right, I am not seeing anything. If you're on a phone and you'd like to make a comment, Abby, is it *6? What is the? Yeah.
I think so. *6 takes you off mute.
So if you'd like to make a comment and you're on your phone, I don't believe there's anybody. All right. So not seeing any interest in speaking, we will close our public hearing and open up discussion amongst the commission. If we are going to have any comments about whether we would or would vote or how we think we should vote, then I will ask for a motion. So questions before the motion is just clarification, and then we'll put a motion on the table and discuss the merits of the motion before voting. So any crosstalk or anybody like to make a motion?
I just want a quick clarification on the public notice process. I honestly, like when I'm in the public looking to see what's on the agenda, I only go to the county website. And so me personally, had I looked at that, if I had a concern or wanted to speak, I wouldn't have seen that was a public hearing. So maybe just a quick clarification on where we post the public hearing agenda information. Sorry for my.
No, you're fine.
My lack of knowledge on that.
We have to post it, and Chrissy can talk to the notification requirements specifically under state law, but this has happened once before in the time that I've been on the planning commission at least. And the agenda packet is there as a guidance, but it's not the binding part of the notification. And then of course there also is the public hearing at the county commission level. And I see Mallory raising her hand, so please weigh in.
I apologize. I'm trying to block the sun. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I can weigh in on this one because I actually posted it. So for this one, it does require the 10 days. So I posted it separately. So this should not be of an issue, as you said, outside of what was on the agenda. But what we do is we'll post it on the Utah Public Notice website, the Grand County website. From what I've seen, it looks like the Planning Commission items for public hearings have not been posted separately, but they should be because they do have that 10-day requirement. And then we also post them in the newspaper and around the building, though it depends. You can do kind of a breakdown, split up of those to meet those requirements. But our primary ones are websites and in the Times.
Okay, great. Thanks for that clarification. I only brought that up to see if there was any concern with the public not getting word of that, but it sounds like it wasn't. And I swear I did do that training. That was really gripping, the online one. I just forgot.
We could send out a summary so that you all have that going forward, if that would be helpful, of seeing for the various land use hearings and approvals what the requirements are.
Sure, yeah, I'd be interested if that was sent out. Thanks.
All right, any other comments before? Well, I'd entertain a motion unless there's any other comments for staff.
I'd make a motion.
Go for it.
I move to favorably recommend the proposed amendment to ordinance number 588 and land use code sections 6.5.3, 6.5.4, 6.5.5D, and 10.2.
Okay, seconded by Garish. All right, so motion by Josie, seconded by Garish. Any discussion? Okay, with that, we will call the vote. All in favor of the motion as stated by Josie, raise your hand. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, wonderful, unanimous. Well, thank you so much, Chrissy, for joining us for 2 items. Appreciate your time. See you next time.
Guys.
Okay, Bob, hello. You've joined us. You're muted. We can't hear you.
Simply sorry, I got sidetracked this afternoon on some personal stuff here. So very sorry.
That is okay. I highly recommend watching the recording on YouTube because it was a very lively discussion
Good.
about both of our agenda discussions today. Okay, so moving on to our land use code update. So this will be really quick. I imagine that this will be something that we continue to revisit. And the part of the reason for this is just with some of the changes at the county, the priorities that this body takes on are going to now shift slightly against items that require a significant amount of planning staff's time. And that opens up some time for us to go into the land use code, which is something that we did note as priority and we've wanted to do for a while. And some of the things that have come up around land use code. So one is water in general. Are there planning options to incentivize or even regulate towards water conservation and lower impact usage across our use tables? There's also a question around things like tiny homes or more dense, not dense, increasing underlying density, but sort of are there specific places where something like a tiny home community might make sense based on the underlying zone? That in of itself might require more planning staff time, but we can do some research. We can look at how other communities are addressing this. In general, I actually went and started rereading our full land use code this weekend. And while we are going to be going through a full general plan update, at which point we will readdress the land use code as a whole, there are definitely places where it's confusing. We're seeing this with the discussion around ATVs being lumped into these aggregate bundled definitions and bundled standards that if the only regulation we have in our code against some of these uses is screening, is that actually reflective of what we have heard from the public and what we've heard from the county commission. So Abby shared a article that I found looking at ways that you can address water conservation through planning. I've actually added a few additional resources to a shared file in our Google Drive that Abby can share around if you all want to see. They were all found through a basic Google search, but look at some of these specific issues. Bob and I also spoke on Saturday, time doesn't matter anymore, looking or talking about also starting to look at, surveying, how that might inform some of the things that we might recommend to the county commission. So here's what I want to request of the group and just get a general appetite, because this is not everyone needs to go take on more work. I would love for anybody who's really interested in looking at one of these areas to commit to actually doing some research and coming up with some different potential tools or different potential options for how to address them. A big one being, for example, the water sustainability. We sort of started this at the beginning of the year when we broke out into working groups, but now we're reassessing. So we will continue to have this on the agenda. What I would love is, as people have ideas, to bring them up as discussion items that we actually get on the agendas, provide, what you're seeing in other communities, examples from their land use codes, things that we could potentially action on. And that way, even if we do have to require, any of staff's time, it's minimal, and we may even be able to participate in, getting us 50% of the way there as far as drafting. The second thing is I asked Bob if he would spearhead any work related to surveying and so on for that Southern 191 corridor. That's going to be an area that we know that we are going to ultimately need planning staff for, but it's probably something that we can, again, make quite a bit of progress on as far as drafting a vision statement and drafting an area to focus on, aligning with the county commission and making sure that any recommendations that we consider are things that would be worth staff's time once we did have a development director. So Bob is going to take the lead on that and hopefully have some future agenda items as well, driving us forward there. So where I'd love to take this discussion is just, is there an item that someone would really like to drive? And just knowing that, then what I will ask for you is to keep it on the agenda and commit to coming back with recommendations or at least some degree of findings that we can move forward. And if there's no interest, that's fine. We'll just move forward.
I have a question, Emily. Is Christina still on the?
No, Christina dropped.
Okay. So other than water conservation measures, I'm not sure that the county or the county through GWSSA has any way to control water use, except, and maybe not even this, but I think if you've been reading the paper, you're aware that though the science hasn't quite settled yet, we are probably at or have exceeded safe yield from our Glen Canyon aquifer. So what do we do about that? Well, one option would be no more hookups. I don't know that the county has the control over GWSSA to say that, but we could withhold building permits. And I just, in general, I think we are kind of missing the boat by jumping first to water conservation without looking at the real solutions, which is we need to stop tapping our aquifer. So I'm just throwing that out as just a general comment. And I totally agree with any and all water conservation measures, but if all it's doing is kicking the can further down the road, and we're not really addressing what the problem is, which is overtapping our aquifer, then we've kind of missed the boat.
So without disagreeing with you, I do think we have to be mindful about the power of this body, and as a recommendation body, where we place our time related to land use code issues may be the most impactful way that we can move forward. I think it would be great if you wanted to take on meeting or connecting with the county attorney and anybody else who could help you form your opinion there, that you could bring back here and let us know what options you see. But what I'd love is just to bias towards action. I mean, there's a lot of concern, and we've had some really wonderful speakers. We've talked about priorities that we want to see. If we bias towards action, what are the things that we might look at? Might we address turf grass in larger developments? Might we address, I know, Garish, you've looked at sustainable, rainwater capture. In our small area plan, we had more, our standards were higher than in other areas of the county due to that natural resource overlay plan. Is that something we may want to extend? So I think that there's things that we can do to act now. And, sometimes perfect is the enemy of good. And there are many things that we could be doing as a county, but as a body right now, without planning staff, I think this is something at the land use code level that we can look at.
I'd only like to say, I would love Garish to check with Christina to see if there are any mechanisms at all in terms of how many hookups we do. Because of course, I think when Emily and I were talking this weekend, one of the things I said is it's really amazing, the city has water rights and the county does not have water rights. GWSSA has those water rights. So if the town starts slowing or limiting growth because of water, they may well be able to do it. That is Moab. Castle Valley has water rights also. But the county's in a very funny position, and maybe Emily's right that the best thing is for us to work on some water conservation things. Garish and I and many other people know that, well, that's a great thing to work on. Sometimes it just leads to water hardening. That is, any resilience you have, if you make everybody put stones in their front yards and use all the water they can off their roofs and stuff, then if, as some people believe, climate change gets worse and you have a population, though, of 20,000 in Grand County, you don't have any resilience. That is, you've used all the easy ways to save water. So it's a big issue. Emily, you're probably right that we can work a bit on water conservation, but it'd be very nice to know if we have any other options.
So Garish and OB, can I point you the committee of going and finding out our other options?
I'd be happy to work with Garish.
Yeah, and I'll try to set up some time where I or with Bob can talk with Christina just to see kind of legally where legally what the options are for the county.
Great. So what I will ask of you both is then, can we hold that to get that on the next agenda? So can you do that in the next 2 weeks, and we will get that on the next agenda to hear what you find? Awesome.
Oh, you're such a taskmaster. Yeah.
Yeah.
She's experienced in knowing you better set deadlines. Or
Well, speaking of deadlines, I have a very big deadline coming up for myself at work. So I am actually not going to take this on for the next couple of weeks. But if there's anyone who would like to volunteer, Abby, I'm so sorry. You look like you're trying to say something and I'm speaking over you. You're good? Okay. If there is anyone who'd like to look into, the resources that I found from the Western Resources Group around planning, if anyone wants to raise a hand, again, read the document, see if, what other communities are doing, and even just to come back with, here's 5 examples from other communities that we might look at, and here's a toolbox of options. I think that would be helpful to just keep that progress moving. So is that something anyone's interested in taking on? Josie?
Yeah, well, I'm interested to read the document that you sent, and also maybe look more at what our normal measures might be towards water conservation based on what other cities are doing. Like a place like Tucson comes to the top of my head. Even though they're much larger, I get the sense that they're very progressive in their water policy. And maybe, because I'm also interested in what OB and Garish find, because I know that one aspect is that to be officially at safe yield, we need a definitive water study to be recognized by the state. And it seems like there's a year or two before that happens. And so I would be curious if that alone is enough of a reason to have some sort of development moratorium as a body, hopefully jointly with the city. And so on that end, on the end that they're looking into, that is something I would be interested in as well. But it does seem prudent to also just see how our land use code could be cleaned up towards those measures as well. So I'll take that on.
Wonderful. So again, 2 weeks from now, we'll just have this discussion item and we'll ask you to report on what you found.
And also I might add that Jeff Adams, who Josie may know, is an amazing thing to have in the community in terms of knowing about, kind of saving water. So
yeah,
he'll
I
be
could pick
good
his brain
for
a little bit as well. Absolutely. We're on a board together.
So none of this is meant to be homework. It's meant to just activate this body to the extent that it wants to lean in, especially while we have this slower period. Is there anyone else who'd like to raise anything? Otherwise, we'll just keep it rolling. And if you find something interesting in your reading or research that you want to bring up, you can email it and we'll get it on the agenda. So Rick, Steve, Makeda, I don't want to volunteer you all for anything that you don't want to be into, but if there's anything you do want to raise, feel free to call it out. All right. Cool. Okay. I think that is it for that item. Anyone want to add any final thoughts, or are we good to move on? Fantastic. All right. Trish, County Commission update.
There you go. Can you hear me?
You're pretty broken up. Oh, you know what, Trisha, do you have a cell phone handy? You might want to call in.
Let me do that. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
No?
That's better.
Okay, is that better? So I'm not going to say a whole lot because it looks like you're going to do a commission meeting update. So I don't think I really need to go over those things on the HDHO rules and regulations, the Planning Commission bylaws. I know that we're going to talk a little bit about the Thompson Springs replat and rezone, and Abby and myself and a fairly large group of individuals have been working on that. I will kind of touch on the other items that we're trying to do out there. The goal is to we're trying to do an initial cleanup and trying to do that fairly soon. And then hopefully looking at the replat and rezone, and then be able to move into a larger cleanup. And we're going to start looking at some grant opportunities in order to do that. Because the goal is really overall like fire mitigation out there. As you guys well know, there's quite a few issues out there. So that's our overall agenda, is just safety for that community. And that's about it.
All right. Abby, do you want to go into a bit more details then on the County Commission action items report?
Yeah, well, I don't have a ton of details. So Trish, maybe you can jump back in if you have anything to add. I mean, I was just going to say that the Planning Commission bylaws and the HCHO rules and regulations are both approved and signed resolutions now. And the Westwater Sky Retreat was a minor record survey out some pretty undeveloped land out by Westwater that passed in the consent agenda. So yeah, Trish, do you have anything you want to add on those?
No, I mean, if my memory is that everything passed unanimously. I mean, obviously the HDHO rules and regulations was a fairly contentious item. So when we went through voting, everybody had to basically delineate why they were voting or outline, you know, why they were voting. You know, and so I think everybody did a really good job outlining what their decision was. And so, yeah, that passed unanimously.
Thank you, Trish.
Right, fantastic. Any questions or comments? Otherwise, we'll move on to the building permit review. Okay.
All right. Yeah, so, and again, I don't have a ton to add on the building permit review. It's all kind of there. Any questions on that? Great. And then Trish did mention for future considerations, I did have the Thompson Springs replat and rezone on the list, but we don't have a ton of information to add on that yet. Like Trish mentioned, or Tricia mentioned, the number one priority are things related to fire safety. And so that's the first priority. Those are already underway, working on some kind of junk cleanup and contacting owners of properties that have some of the more threatening abandoned structures. And you know, that process is very much moving forward with people out in Thompson, with the health department, with, you know, Monument Waste, Solid Waste District. And then the replat and rezone is what the you know, planning and zoning office is going to be focusing on. Lucas Blake, the county surveyor, is working on kind of developing what it would take for a replat. Not all of Thompson Springs, but there are large pieces of Thompson Springs where the parcel lines and the lots just kind of don't make sense. They're, you know, they show things like a house that's in the middle of a road. And so that's what that is just cleaning up all those parcel lines so that they actually you know, make sense. And then the rezone is going to be a larger project that is, again, a little further down the line when our staff capacity is back up. But the Thompson Springs was initially just zoned all range and grazing, and then kind of parcel by parcel. As different things have happened, people have gotten parcels rezoned. But for example, range and grazing has a minimum lot size of 5 acres, and there are a lot of parcels that are well under 5 acres zoned range and grazing. So the rezone process is going to be looking at Thompson and kind of looking at all these range and grazing parcels and evaluating, deciding whether the Planning Commission and ultimately County Commission feels that different zoning would be more appropriate. You know, kind of looking at future development and making sure that the zones on the ground align with what the future development priorities are for Thompson. So I had that as a future consideration, just to get that idea into the mix here with Planning Commission. And we'll start to really dive into the meat of that a little later on. So that was everything I had for future considerations.
Does anyone have any questions for Abby or their own future considerations?
The other thing, and I know we've already talked about this, and I don't know how far down the road it's gotten, is just the survey of Spanish Valley. And if it hasn't gone very far, just to kind of put it back on future considerations.
Yeah, that's what I think we're going to keep an eye on. With Bob taking the lead on that 191 area, I think we'll look to him to guide us on how we approach that as a body without significant planning staff resources, because that's definitely going to be the largest constraint. We have done surveys in the past of, for different small zone areas. So why don't we just plan on, keeping that on an item to touch on as we move forward.
That sounds great. Thank you.
Awesome. All right. Anything else? All right. With no objections, then I will end the meeting. All right. All good. Thanks, everyone. Have a great night. Bye.
Thank you.